It's been a while since I've talked about stuff, just randomly. This is on my podcast channel. The last upload on here was a little music thing, I believe, which was pretty cool. I want to talk over Monster Hunter Weapons difficulty. Originally, I was going to do this before Rise came out, but then Rise came out, so I really had to kind of regrasp a few weapons because they did change a little bit. The main reason is I watched a video basically, which was this kind of exact concept. I was going, I am confused. Why did you put like certain things in certain places? Because specific difficulty. I've placed the weapons approximately. Oh, wait, hold it. No, that makes sense. Approximately in the time-ish when they came out, give or take. Which to be fair, I just put gun lance next to lance for convenience. Uh, so, and I'm using hard to simple because the hard is inaccurate. I'm going to use it as complex. So that's just a quick disclaimer. Hard is complex, not necessarily actually really hard to use. Because there are a few weapons that are really complicated, but they're also really easy. So, and it's things like simple doesn't mean easy. It just means they have either a limited move set, or they're easy to learn, like their combos are easy to learn, or you don't necessarily need to be aware of every functionality to make them exceptionally effective. So we'll just start straight. Hi, Greatsword. Greatsword is the number one most absolute. I really should not have the saver download there, but nevertheless, number one easiest weapon. Not even from a simplicity standpoint, it is the easiest weapon. End of story. Flat. Uh, it still requires focus and knowledge of monsters, even to maybe a larger extent than others. But you can do that outside of learning its moveset. It has, from a standard sense, one combo that basically you use. It's charge, true charger, rage slash. Now, there's plenty of ways to get there, and there's shoulder tackles, there's different other attacks, but most of those just require you to push two buttons at the same time, or push a different button while you're holding a button, or press a button after releasing a button. It's not really that hard to learn by any means. Most combos are straightforward. Well, it's one combo. There's other things you can do as well in combo with them, but not as much. We have a few different options of additional things you can do with it. For example, there's a lot of flexibility with the way you build Greatsword. No, there isn't. There is basically three major ways of making Greatsword, and you will unintentionally fall into one of these three categories, unless you're being silly and making a meme build, which is perfectly fine. But so you have the raw damage build, which is just simply get a big number as big as possible. The status build, which is usually going for things like blast, so you just do more damage over time. This is usually done if you're not necessarily sure about your actual like skill with the weapon. You just want to make sure it dies. You don't care how long it takes; they die. So usually blast or poison is the one that you go with Greatsword, because if memory serves, those are usually the highest status numbers on a Greatsword. I think there's one with paralysis, but I don't think the sleep Greatswords are very good. I don't remember because I don't ever run status Greatsword, but I do know that that does happen. And then finally, the one that's the most common. Oh, technically also, that could also technically fall to crit draw as well. Would be crit, with one of two styles of crit draw or just 100% affinity. Crit draw in World and Iceborne more specifically Iceborne, was just broken. Once you got, well, this was more really far end game, because crit draw could combine with Frostcraft, and Frostcraft allowed certain attacks from sheath or not drawn, basically by rolling and stuff like that, would allow you to create a form of contingency. Basically, you do extra damage when you don't hit the end, which is great for Greatsword, because you're, especially for crit draw, you're putting the weapon away a lot, so it does a lot of damage. It's not necessarily the best set, but you can combine it. Once Frostfang Barioth came out, you could combine it together, and it got really powerful very quickly. The problem with it is you are trading off Fatalis armor for it, and Volcana Gamma armor is very good, but it's not as generally good. You have to basically build crit draw for Greatsword if you're building it. In Rise, I have three kinds of sets. This is a bit more the category, but basically they pretty much all fall under either crit draw or affinity, because I can't really be bothered to make anything else out of Greatsword. The only other major silly one I remember is Element Greatsword, which is stupid, and I love it. So that's it for Greatsword. Let's talk about Sword and Shield. Why? Because Sword and Shield is cool. The end. Sword and Shield is probably... I wouldn't say it's as simple as a Greatsword, mostly because it does have combos that you need to learn, but it's not incredibly hard. Also, very hard and very simple will only have one, just quick disclaimer. So simple will be, like, I'd say simple because it's actively easy to learn, easy to pick up. Anyone can play it, pretty much. It's push buttons, and you can do good. It also is one of the best weapons to just kind of think about. Once you actually start playing it, you realize, oh, this goes into this, this goes into this. With Rise, they added additional ways to get off, basically Perfect Rush and a few other types of attacks, which is great. Like, 100%. It makes Sword and Shield way more viable. Not to mention, its silk binds are really dope. You have the spinning, you literally just spin your sword around a boatload, or you have a Shoryuken, which is cool. So, you have plenty of options to choose from, and most of them are just simply play how you want to play. Do you want to play Raw Sword and Shield? You can do that. You want to play Elemental Sword and Shield? You can do that. You want to play Affinity Sword and Shield? You can do that. You want to play weird status hybrid support? You can do that. Because Sword and Shield is that versatile. It is the versatile weapon. It is the weapon that can do everything, but not necessarily do it well. It does it okay. Though, to be fair, there is a 100% affinity Sword and Shield in Rise, and I love it. It just, like, you can just make a crit boost set with it, and you don't need to put any crit eye on it, which is incredibly weird. Or with his exploit, you don't have to put any of that on it, and it's really weird and jarring, because all you do is shove more attack into it. We'll now talk about the lance, the pokey stick. I haven't played the pokey stick in a while. In World, well, in Iceborne, not World. I didn't really play Lance in World. I only really played it in Iceborne. I'd probably have put it at hard, but then in Rise, I want to say it's average, because it loses some of the mechanics that is from Iceborne, like the clutch claw counter. That made it a bit more annoying to figure out how things work. It was a bit more it's a bit more straightforward, but you also have, like, the counter silk binds and other types of stuff that you need to learn. We'll throw it in hard, just for the aspect of, even though it's a very consistent and simple weapon from, let's just say, conceptual standpoint, it's like What If Greatsword, but extreme. And now that I think about it, no, it should actually be an average, because of the simple reason is I compared it to Greatsword. So it's not overly that difficult. The biggest thing you have to remember is that a lot of your attacks, specifically, in Rise anyway, will likely be constantly pounding the monster with relatively decent damage numbers, but not like massive damage numbers. So you're going to be you're not going to get as the satisfying hits quite so much. But there are a few hits from Lance that do hit really hard and are very nice to use. We'll now talk about Gun Lance. The one thing with Gun Lance is I want to make a reference to the video I watched. They said guarding lowers your sharpness. Gun Lance and Lance do not lose sharpness on guarding. Why? Because they have a shield that you don't use for attacks. Well, the Lance uses a few of the shields for attacks, but not actively. Gun Lance is, I would say, just as complicated as Lance, so it goes in average, but it has a bit more of a flux to it. It has the complexity of what shelling type do you want, and that will change how you play. But the overall gameplay of it doesn't really change that much. It's relatively straightforward. Unless you're playing normal Gun Lance, then it's one combo. With wide and long Gun Lance, it's usually focused on either Wyvern Stake, Wyvern Fire, or just shells. Just spam shells at it. I usually play long Gun Lance. Full disclosure, I play the Gun Lance no one plays. Main reason why people don't usually play long Gun Lance is its Wyvern Fire is a multi-hit, 1. 2, long Gun Lance has the downside of having less shells than normal, but having more than wide, but not by that much. It still chews through your sharpness. So that's just note. I love long Gun Lance. I also do very much like normal Gun Lance. Normal Gun Lance can be a very fun time because you're basically just sitting there murdering a monster with combos. And in Iceborne, because of the Wyvern Stake improvement, with the slinger ammo, you could create an even more interesting encounter just by basically doing nothing other than attaching this somewhere and just hitting them with constant barrages of fire. I think one time at the end of a multiplayer quest, when it shows all like what people did, I think it said it like I had 107 slinger shots fired, and that's just because every time you hit your stake, it counted as a slinger shot being fired. So I was very accurate. That, and to be fair, I did have 3 remarkable allies when I was doing it, and they kept the monster doing nothing, and it was great because I was just able to sit there and keep hitting it. We'll talk about dual blades. Dual blades are probably the second easiest weapon other than greatsword. They are exceptionally simple. You have 2 modes: demon mode and archdemon mode. Demon mode, you press basically the right bumper or whatever button you have it set to. You attack, it fills up. Once it's filled up, you can exit demon mode and you will be in archdemon mode. Basically, the only real difference it is, your moveset slightly changes. And even then, it's a very simple moveset. I have noticed, though, Rise did actually add an additional set of attacks, which is called Demon Flurry, which wasn't completely in World. And Demon Flurry has 3 stages. In World and Iceborne, Demon Flurry had 1 attack, and it was quick, and it was usually what people used to get, basically, using a Slinger Burst to get out of a position. Because it was quick, it was easy to cancel out of, very nice. In this, because no longer the case, it now has extra steps, and it does more damage than basically than the Demon Dance, which is the same button combination on Demon mode. So, I think the biggest thing why it's slightly more complicated than Greatsword is simply it trains your stamina. You need to keep an eye on your stamina. In the older games, like in GU and below, where we had Mega Dash Juice, this wasn't really a problem. You just make Mega Dash Juice and go in. I have an Aerial Dual Blade set. I love Aerial Dual Blade. Aerial Dual Blade is great. Actually, a fun fact, just completely unrelated, a little side story. I was slowly building Yukanlos armor because I wanted it for a specific set. Because Yukanlos armor is great. That and I love Yukanlos. Yukanlos is probably one of my favorite monsters. Not in the top 10, though. It'd be top 15. It's just really cool to fight as well. So, okay, sure, I don't mind doing it. I was mostly doing it with Chargeblade, which is my main, so it makes sense. But I had dual blades I wanted to use, and I do it on occasion. And I decided, because I was getting pretty good with them, I went, screw it. Let's fight Yukanlos with dual blades. I did it. As a note, this was solo in G rank, so it took me like 30 minutes. They were fire dual blades, but I did not have elemental attack up, so I was basically doing raw dual blades with a heavy amount of fire that had to be sharpened every 5 minutes. But it was fun. I successfully did it, and that was my final hunt of Yukanlos, and it gave me the armor set, which I don't really use anymore because it's been replaced, and I'm upset that I'm upset that I replaced it, but I'm not really upset because the armor set I use is better. But I liked it, and I do have a few sets that still use it, so we're all good in that front. Next, I'm going to talk about the one, the only, the weeb weapon, Longsword. Full disclosure, originally, I was never going to play Longsword again. I played it in 4U, and I never really wanted to play it again because I didn't really like it anymore. I then played it in Iceborne. I have 17 sets. It's not my main. That'd be Chargeblade, where I have 20. I have a lot of sets in Iceborne at this point. One for each weapon at the very least, but the majority of sets are Chargeblade, Greatsword, Longsword, and Hammer. Those are the 4 big ones. So, yeah, I may or may not have a slight problem. But Longsword is really unique, as I do feel it has 2 different difficulty levels. Plus because it depends on the game you are currently playing. In Monster Hunter, like the OG Monster Hunters, I would say Longsword is one of the most complicated weapons. Other than when it first came out. So, but they introduced Spirit Gauge. Why? Because it didn't really have a way to defend itself. Like, at all. You had to be very careful. Its damage output is ludicrous. Like, it's ludicrous. I realized that in 4U. Like, it is ridiculous. You kill things fast. But it has its own set of issues, I guess. Once I learned it personally in World, it was really easy to pick up. I could do combos. The counters were the crap. The counters are pivotal for high-level gameplay. Now, in Rise, I can pull a Foresight Slash like whatever business. I can actually pull off Yai counters pretty easily as well. We'll get to how I feel about the Yai counters in a little bit. And the Yai Slashes are very nice. So the additional button presses and the additional timing required does, I think, put it a bit above simple. So I think we're going to put it in average, but I'm going to keep talking. Relating to the Yai counter. In World, the Yai counter on a failed hit will consume a Spirit Gauge. On a successful hit, it will not. Basically, all this means is, if you countered, you get to keep your Spirit Gauge. If you didn't, you don't. Its damage output is still really high, but it's only a 2-hit attack. While in Rise, it, instead of on a successful counter, just keeping your Spirit Gauge the same, it actually increases it, and a fail will just not do anything. It will just do 1-hit damage. it also became a 5-hit combo. Which sadly makes it a bit less optimal for crit draw sets, because only the and punishing draw, only the first hit would count towards punishing draw, which is a bit sad. But things like the eye slash or the double counter draw counter do make it a bit more interesting. You can also build longsword in several ways. I haven't really talked about builds for other weapons recently, but for things like lance, gun lance, and dual blades, lance and gun lance, they basically build the same, just swap out certain things to get artillery and load shells on gun lance, and you're good. Dual blades, you can build them raw affinity. They're just not as good. On average, if you build dual blades, you'll be going elemental, which makes sense. You have a lot of hits, so you can rack up elemental damage. But that also means you require a lot more sets than other weapons, because you have to basically have one set per element. And you need to make sure that the monster you're fighting is actually weak to the element you are using. I had that fun time once. I was doing my armor roulette, letting viewers pick my armor. And the lovely thing of dual blades came up. If memory serves, they were fire dual blades. And I was fighting Glavenus. Yay! So there could be issues if you're not careful. Because of that, I think I'm going to put longsword at average because of its overall lack of full complexity, but it still has its complex attitudes. We're going to go now talk about hammer. A hammer is movable greatsword. It's simple. It's a very simple weapon. You can either play it combo-y, which is very good, or you can play it charge-like. And in Rise, there's now 2 ways of playing combo-y, because there's a different type of switch attack. Which I won't really go into, even though it is what I actually use. 100% honest, I do use courage rather than strength. But there's some intricacies to the weapon. And because it hits more often than greatsword, you can actually get away with by making elemental sets with it. You can also be a bit more silly. Plus, it is the only weapon in Rise to have a sliding attack, which is nice, and which means you could build a affinity sliding set for it, and it would actually be relatively decent. Not great, but decent. Nothing else to say about hammer. Hammer is very similar to something like dual blades or greatsword or sword and shield. It's incredibly simple. Its mechanics are straightforward. I could give hammer to probably most people, give them a quick rundown of the controls, and they could get into it. My friend Arrow, he is a notorious greatsword main. He would not touch any other weapon other than other than light bowgun. And then later gun lance. He eventually picked up gun lance with like a 9-foot pole, because greatsword is best weapon. So basically, I managed to slowly convert him to like start try other weapons. Maybe you'll like them. And he slowly started picking them up. And then he, completely out of... I didn't even ask him to do this. I didn't even ask him to try it. He picked up hammer, and he's loved it. He has a hammer set, and I love it. It's great. So hammer is it's a simple weapon you can give to anybody, and they will enjoy it. The way you play it does change a lot per person, though. It is one of the weapons with not necessarily the most flexibility, but the most actual range of what people do with it. Because, yes, longsword, dual blades, and probably even gun lance or lance do have a lot more ways to play than what we see usually. But it's usually a lot more set in stone what a lot of people build for, because they go, well, this is good, this is good, this is good, and this is the type of weapon it is, so this. Even if they unintentionally do it, usually you end up with a meta set. Unintentionally. That is what I have noticed. With hammer, it's always been, are we going meta today, or are we doing something else? Hammer is that weird weapon. Now we should talk about The good old hand horn. Um, this is varied. I kind of want to put two different hunting horns on here, just for the sake of Rise versus World, uh, and older hunting horn. Older hunting horn, I would say, would be in the running for the very hard, like most complex weapon. New hunting horn, average. So we're gonna put it in hard, just because it's the in between. Uh, New hunting horn is still complicated. But we should go over old hunting horn first. Hunting horn had a set of notes. These notes allowed you to play different, basically, songs. These songs usually had about 5 or 6 max. Typically, the older games it was 3 or 4, and then later on they got more. I think in World and some of that you got a lot more songs. But they basically, what you would do, you would hit monsters or attack, and then play the hunting horn. When you play it, it creates an effect. You could continue playing, or you could go into an attack, which would do some extra damage, and other stuff. Hunting horn did also have the extra niche of being a blunt weapon, similar to hammer. And in World, they had some additional attacks to make them a bit more user-friendly. They had the echo note, they had the breakdance, and other things to make it a bit more, like, not necessarily user-friendly, but simple. Plus, they had very clean displays on the HUD to make it very clear what your songs are, so you're not completely going bonkers trying to figure out what song is which. In Rise, on the other hand, ignore that. They still have the HUD to tell you things, but basically the way it works is there's 2 different styles of playing hunting horn actively. The first one is you play a note twice and it plays a song. The end. When you play 3 types of notes, you can create a combo which will play all of your songs at once. If you fill up your gauge to a specific point, you could play the song, the Infernal Song or Song of Raging Flame, depending on the hunting horn, and that would give an attack boost of X amount to whoever heard it, which is fine. 100%. That's literally basically how you play normal hunting horn. It's a very heavy combo weapon. It is nasty. The first time I beat Mitsuzune was in the demo, because this was back when everyone was shite. It was me and someone else. We just went. They were playing hunting horn before, but I still went, no, I'm gonna play hunting horn. I don't care. We're doing this. And that was my second time playing hunting horn in the demo. And we murdered the Mitsuzune. We just slaughtered them. Hunting horn is the one weapon which is like, wow, that's cool. The other way of playing it is a bit closer to the original way of playing, where you have to play some notes and then you basically hit a button to play them. But instead, it just plays, you just need one note from each, and as long as they're there on your scale when you play, you will get the effects. So you don't get quite as much oomph usually out of that one, but it's way easier for support. You can just spam your healing songs as much as you want. Why? Because it plays them that many times. You can also do it for attack boosts and stuff like that. I still prefer the first one. It's a bit more aggressive. You can be nasty with it. But if you want to play a bit more laid back of a hunting horn, the other option is there. But once again, it is far more straightforward. The biggest thing is you do need to remember what notes are which. There's some additional skills you might need to learn. And building for hunting horn is not really that painful. It is, you need Horn Maestro. The end. That's it. That's how you build hunting horn. We should now talk about Switch Axe. Switch Axe. The problem with Switch Axe is that Switch Axe is weird. I want to say it's hard and complicated, but I don't find it complicated, because a lot of his attacks seem natural, like they flow together. Switch Axe is a very fluid weapon. Once you start playing and picking it up and realize what is what, you'll create combos that you never thought were possible. because just that's how the weapon is. It's incredibly fluid. If anything, the biggest downside I think to it is you have to be patient. Not in World, no, in World, not in Rise, where you have to sometimes wait if you spent a bit too much of your sword gauge. So you have to be a bit careful. But in Rise, it doesn't matter. If you have a full thing, it affects the axe too. So I will put it in hard simply for, I believe, the perceived perception of the complexity of the weapon and the amount of attacks you can get from the weapon and the level of combos you get from it. Though, personally, I do think it is one of the easier weapons to play from just a raw standpoint. Then we get to my bay, which not really, is Chargeblade. Chargeblade, by far, is the most mechanically complicated weapon. Straight. It is mechanically the most complicated weapon. It is by far not the hardest weapon. Hell. Let's see. I'd probably say, it like from a difficulty standpoint, I would probably put it like right down here with like longsword and like even hammer. It is not hard to play. It is just mechanically taxing. You have to keep an eye on your files. You have to keep an eye on pretty much your sharpness as well. You have to remember that blocking does degrade your sharpness because your shield is a weapon. You have to remember that your amped elemental discharge might not necessarily hit. You need to remember that your specific combos to get into amped elemental discharge or normal elemental discharge might be a bit different. You may want to go into basically a infinite combo. You can do that. There's quite a few of them, but you do need to be careful because those eat through sharpness like candy. You also need to remember that there's a charged up shield mode. There's the ability to charge your sword. Or in Rise and Iceborne, you have in Rise, you can swap the charging the sword for charging the shield. Or in Iceborne, you have Savage Axe, which is also incredibly amazing. And absolutely love Savage Axe. In Iceborne, I'm going to make that note very clear. I like it in Iceborne, I don't like it in Rise. Simply for the aspect, it takes way too long to use. One. Second, it ends when you swap modes. 2. 3. I find using axe mode to increase by files ridiculous. This is likely just because I've played Chargeblade for so long. It's ingrained in my mind. You will switch, and most of my combos rely on building files, then using the files, and then going to build the files again. Very straightforward, but very like building blocks. I have other things I do as well, but that's a very straightforward way of thinking about it. So, from a mechanical standpoint, Chargeblade is the most mechanically taxing weapon. Is it the hardest weapon? No. By no means. It is not the hardest weapon. Actually, I'm going to fix these then. There. Problem solved. It's the most mechanically complex weapon. Not the hardest, by any means. It is nowhere near the hardest weapon. Then we're going to talk about Insect Glaive. I was tempted to put Insect Glaive in the very complicated rather than Chargeblade. Simply because of Kinsect management. But then Rise happened and made Kinsect management a bit less of a nightmare. And Kinsect management in Iceborne was already a bit less of a nightmare. No, it's very much less of a nightmare. In the older games, aka 4U, Gen /GU, you had to feed your Kinsect specific things to try and get it to be how you want it, which was an absolute bloody nightmare because it meant going on gathering quests consistently to get the stupid ambrosia and the stupid shit that you needed to make sure to get for your Kinsect. That was my number one pet peeve of Kinsect. And it worked. It was fine. And I enjoyed it. It was straightforward. Everyone can have fun. Uh, yeah, it's still really hard. That, and you always have to remember that aerial Insiglaive, even in Rise, which to be fair, in Rise though they did modify some of the aerial attacks, so it is a bit better. Aerial Insiglaive is still kind of not how you're supposed to play. But Aerial Insiglaive is better in Rise because they did increase the damage of aerial attacks just for every weapon, so Insiglaive was not an exception. And it helps build the Wyvern Ride gauge, which is nice. The main point of Insiglaive anyway in the first place was to get mounts. It was the mount weapon. It is the weapon for you to get mounts with. Four more specifically, but over here in North America, we never got 4. We only got 4U for some reason. I don't know why. Well, I know very much why. It's because 3U sold poorly. So yeah, it makes sense. So we're just going to put it. We'll put it in the complex, but know that it's very close to Chargeblade in that kind of front. We have 3 additional weapons. We have the ranged weapons. Now, I was tempted to put medium bowgun here just to see who would basically get it. Originally, well, not originally, but this was in Try. In Try, there was a medium bowgun. Yes, a medium bowgun. You had light, medium, and heavy. Medium was stupid, and no one liked it. That's it. I have nothing else to say about it. There are 3 ranged weapons. And personally, they each fall into one of these categories. But not for the reasons you might think. The first one up is the average one, which is light bowgun. Light bowgun is probably the most straightforward out of all of them. It's point and shoot. But so is heavy bowgun, but we'll get to that later. It's point and shoot, but you often have limited ammo capacity and your damage is often lower, so you need to rely on a lot of statuses or other hunters to help assist you with this matter. Now, in World, well, not World, but in Iceborne, once Safi came out, Sticky became way more effective. And Sticky Light Bowgun, I have a bit of a penchant of hatred for, because it was everywhere. Once a bit before Fatalis came out, it kind of died down, which was like a sigh of, oh, I'm so happy. I don't have to deal with you anymore. It's not necessarily that it's a bad way to play, I just always found it really annoying whenever I saw it. It was a bit of a pain, but the other issue that I remember is you might need to craft on site, or in the newer games, return to the tent and pick up extra ammo. That is something you will need to remember with the light bowgun. You have limited capacity, so you need to be careful. With heavy bowgun, it's actually, I'm going to put it under simple. Why simple, you may ask? Well, it's simple. I'm being silly. It is, you don't necessarily need to actually restock, depending on the type of heavy bowgun you have and what kind of ammo you're using, what you're hunting. If you do need to restock, you have a more massive capacity, so you could just create en masse rather than have only a little bit. And also because you can either go with extra damage, or you can just sit there and not take damage because you have guard, which is basically the same as lance guarding. And it's incredibly potent. So that's something else. Will I say, I don't necessarily say these weapons are easier than each other. Probably all the ranged weapons fit about the same difficulty standpoint. They all have the issue of, well, now, lower defense than melee weapons. They also have the issue of requiring ammo in some form of capacity, though bow is a bit of an exception. We're going to throw bow in complex. This is not necessarily, this is more something to do with Rise rather than in World. In World and Iceborne, I would have probably put bow at average. because even though it was complicated, its moveset was straightforward. Though it was a bit more on the slightly harder side, like more complicated side, so you need to be a bit more careful. So I probably would have bumped it up a little, like it would be like at the top of average. It'd be the most complex of the average. But in Rise, they did something really interesting. They gave every bow a unique buff it can do, which just immediately made it slightly more complicated. Because you have to remember, what bow am I using? Am I using a brace bow? Am I using an affinity bow? Am I using a healing bow? Am I using this kind of, like, you need to realize and remember, am I using a defense bow? Realize and remember, what effect do I have on my arc shot? So that's one. Two, they added additional switch skills, which drained your stamina faster for certain things, which makes sure you have to realize your stamina more. And just like sword, shield, hammer, and insect glaive, the bow is a stamina hog. It loves stamina. It will chew through it. I do actually really like how this ended up. This ended up a very clean and organized thing. Map with one very complex, one very simple, and 4 in all the other categories. Though, let's just do some quick rearranging. Let's make them how basically to the far left will be the ones the most complicated. The ones to the far right will be the least complicated of their tier. So let's make this. Insect Glaive, as I said, probably the most, and we'll put them like this. This personally feels most right. When it comes to average, I will put. Yeah, actually no, this is right. Just have light bowgun here, because light bowgun is still a bit more complicated than the other weapons, but it's not by that much. Here, similar take as these, though I will put hammer being a bit more complicated than dual blades. So this is my totally official, there is no bias whatsoever, complexity gauge for Monster Hunter weapons. For a difficulty range, I might do that at some point, but I don't feel that's appropriate, mostly because everyone usually finds a weapon their own difficulty. For example, when I picked up Chargeblade, I picked it up very fast. It was a weapon I really clicked with, so I didn't find it hard. I don't think that's a very fair comparison to anyone, ever. So, if you enjoy this type of video and want to see more rankings and other things, be it on Monster Hunter, Pokemon, other stuff, let me know, and I will probably make it eventually, because I have a very bad track record of uploading on the podcast channel. Because I have like 8 podcasts, well, rants that I do, because obviously I do them a lot. And I forgot to actually edit them and upload them. So they're just WAVs sitting in my podcast folder. That's my own fault. And I will see you here later. I'm sorry for this taking so long.